There is a particular kind of cold that changes the way you think. I am standing on the ice, a very long way from anywhere, and the light is strange. The sun sits low and pale on the horizon and never seems to climb, and it gives off almost no warmth at all. In every direction, the white runs out flat until it meets the sky, with no line between them, and there is no sound but the wind. And then, every so often, something deeper. A groan, a crack, the ice settling, like something enormous turning over in its sleep. That is the first thing you have to understand about the frozen places. We imagine them as a great silence, blank and empty and dead. They are the opposite. They are full. And they are, very slowly, beginning to speak. Let me give you the scale of it, because it matters. Almost all of the fresh water on this planet is locked up here, at the poles, as ice. In Antarctica alone, the ice holds most of the world's supply, and in places it lies nearly 5 kilometers thick, deep enough to bury mountains whole. It is the coldest, driest, highest, most hostile continent there is. The lowest natural temperature ever properly recorded on Earth was measured here, almost 90 degrees below zero. At that cold, the world stops behaving the way you expect. Water does not flow. Flesh does not rot. Time, in a sense, stops. And that is exactly why the ice is so unsettling, because a place where nothing rots is a place where nothing is ever truly finished. It is a vault. Whatever falls into it, or is sealed beneath it, is kept, more or less intact, waiting. For 100,000 years, for 1,000,000, for longer. What follows are 7 things that vault has been keeping. 7 discoveries out of the ice, north and south, of the kind people like to call terrifying, and some of them have more than earned the word. But I will make you a promise at the start. I will keep what is true, separate from what is merely frightening, and where a story has run out ahead of the evidence, I will stop and say so. That matters more than ever here, because the ice is where our imaginations most like to bury the things we want to believe. We will count them down, from the 7th to the 1st, and as we go, we move deeper into the ice, and further back in time, until at the very end we reach the largest secret of all, a whole world, hidden under our feet, that no human being has ever seen. Let us go in. Number 7. The glacier that bleeds. In one of the coldest, driest deserts on Earth, in a corner of Antarctica, where it has not rained in a very long time, there is a glacier with a wound in its side. And out of that wound, staining the white ice a deep and shocking red, pours what looks for all the world like blood. For a long time, nobody knew what it was. When it was first found, more than a century ago, people guessed it must be some kind of red algae staining the ice. They were wrong. The truth is stranger. What flows from the glacier is not blood, and it is not algae. It is water, extraordinarily salty water, so full of iron that when it finally reaches the surface and meets the air, the iron does exactly what iron does. It rusts. The moment it touches oxygen, it turns red, and the glacier appears to bleed. It is, quite literally, a bleeding rust stain, kilometers from anywhere. But where is that water coming from? In a place frozen solid. That is the real discovery. Deep beneath the glacier, sealed away from the air and the light, there is a body of ancient salt water, and it has been down there, cut off from the world above, for something like 1.5 million years, trapped since long before our own species existed. And it is not lifeless. Down in that sealed, dark, airless brine, there are living things. Microbes, getting by with no sunlight and no oxygen at all, running their lives on nothing but iron and sulfur pulled from the rock around them. An entire tiny ecosystem, surviving in total darkness and cold, sealed off from the rest of the living world since before there were people to wonder about it. I find that genuinely difficult to hold in my head. A pocket of ancient sea, older than humanity, kept in the dark under the ice, still quietly alive. And the only reason we know it is there at all is that a thin trickle of it has found a crack and crept out and rusted red in the light. It makes you wonder how many other sealed rooms there are under this ice that have not yet found a crack. The bleeding glacier keeps its secret by holding the cold in. The next one turns the cold into a weapon and reaches down to kill. Number 6. The finger of death. This one I can hardly believe we have on film, but we do. Under the sea ice around Antarctica, in the black water beneath that frozen lid, something grows downward, slowly, patiently. A pale tube of ice reaches down from the underside of the sea ice toward the sea floor, like a finger feeling for the bottom, and everything it touches, it kills. To understand it, you have to understand how sea ice forms. When the surface of the ocean freezes, the ice cannot hold the salt, so it squeezes it out. What is left behind is brine, extremely cold and extremely salty, far colder than the ordinary seawater around it, and heavier too. So it sinks, and it is so cold that as it sinks it freezes the ordinary seawater it passes through into a delicate sheath of ice around itself. That sheath becomes a tube. The tube grows downward, fed by more freezing brine sliding through its center, until it becomes a long, hollow icicle descending through the sea. They have a proper name, brinicles, but the nickname is the one that sticks, the icicle of death. Because the brine flowing through it is so cold that when the tube finally reaches the sea floor, that killing cold spreads out across the bottom. And the slow creatures living there, the starfish, the sea urchins, the things that cannot move quickly enough to escape, are simply frozen where they sit. A creeping frost of death spreading out from the point where the finger touched down. For years, this was only a rumor among the people who dive beneath the ice. Then, a little over a decade ago, a documentary film crew working in the Antarctic managed to capture one forming, from beginning to end, for the very first time. You can watch it happen. You can watch the finger reach down through the dark, touch the bottom, and freeze a living world, solid in a slow spreading ring. I will be honest and say the nickname does more work than the science strictly needs. It is not hunting anything. It is only physics, cold and salt and gravity, doing something beautiful and terrible at the same time. But knowing that does not make it any easier to watch a living sea floor turn to ice from a single point, as if something had reached down and touched it. That was the sea freezing. The next one is the land itself coming apart and opening up. Number 5. The gateway to the underworld. In the far east of Siberia, in a cold and lonely part of Russia, there is a great scar in the earth that the local people have learned to avoid. They do not like the sound it makes. They do not like what it is doing, and they have given it a name that tells you exactly how they feel about it. The gateway to the underworld. From above, it looks like a vast tadpole-shaped gash in the forest, close to a kilometer long, with steep raw walls dropping away into the ground, and it is getting bigger every single year. This is the largest scar of its kind on the planet, and it is not a crater from any impact, and it is not the mouth of anything. It is the ground itself collapsing, as the ice inside it melts. Because this is permafrost country, where the soil has stayed frozen solid for tens of thousands of years, holding the land together like mortar. When that frozen ground thaws, it slumps and sinks and slides away, and the hole it leaves keeps growing outward as more frozen ground is exposed and thaws in its turn. This one began decades ago, after the forest above it was cleared, and it has been widening ever since. Every year it eats further into the land, its walls retreating outward, releasing something like 1 million cubic meters of thawed material in a single year. And as it cuts down into the ground, it cuts down through time. The walls of this scar expose layers of frozen earth that have not seen daylight in an unimaginably long while. The oldest layers laid bare at the bottom are around 650,000 years old. That is the oldest frozen ground in all of Siberia, open to the air, thawing at the bottom of a pit that should not exist. I want to be careful and honest here, because it would be easy to make this sound supernatural, and it is not. There is no underworld down there. What is down there is time, and carbon, and the deep frozen past, being spilled open by a warming world faster than almost anyone predicted. Which is, if you think about it, quite frightening enough on its own. But the gateway is not just spilling out time and mud, it is also giving back the dead, and they are astonishingly well preserved. Number 4. The things that woke up. Everything in that frozen ground was put into the deep freeze and forgotten. And a freezer that good does not only keep bones, it keeps flesh and skin and hair. It also keeps things far smaller and far more troubling. Let me start with the honest, careful version of the frightening one, because this is exactly the kind of story that gets wildly overblown. A few years ago, scientists working with samples of ancient Siberian permafrost did something that sounds like the opening of a horror film. They took a virus that had been frozen in the ground for around 48,000 years, and they woke it up. And it still worked. After 48,000 years in the ice, it could still infect a living cell and multiply. Now, here is the part the headlines usually leave out, and it matters enormously. That virus infects amoebae, tiny single-celled organisms. It cannot touch you, or me, or any animal. The scientists chose that kind of virus on purpose, precisely because it is harmless to people. What they were testing was not a weapon, it was a question. Can something ancient, frozen for that long, still come back to life when it thaws? And the answer, unsettlingly, is yes. So no, the ice is not about to release a plague that ends the world. I want to be very clear about that, because plenty of people online would rather you believed otherwise. But the careful truth still has an edge to it, because we already have one real example of the ice handing us back a killer. In the summer of 2016, on a peninsula in the Russian Arctic, an unusually fierce heatwave thawed the ground, and with it thawed the carcass of a reindeer that had died, decades earlier, of anthrax. The frozen ground had kept the anthrax spores intact and dormant all that time. As the carcass thawed, the spores were released back into the soil and water. Reindeer began to die by the thousand. People fell ill, and a 12-year-old boy died. A disease that had been sealed in the ice for the better part of a century simply thawed out and killed, as if no time had passed at all. That is the real weight of it, not a doomsday plague. Something quieter and more honest. The ice does not forget, and as it melts, it is handing back things we thought were safely buried. Most of them are harmless, but not all of them. The ice gives back microbes and disease. It also gives back giants. Number 3. The dead that will not decay. If the frozen ground can keep a virus intact for 48,000 years, imagine what it can do with an animal. Out of that same Siberian permafrost, in recent years, the bodies of the Ice Age have been coming back into the light. Not fossils, not bone. Bodies, with skin and fur and muscle and the last meal still in the stomach. There was a woolly mammoth, a female, pulled from the frozen coast, that had been dead for around 39,000 years, and was so well kept that liquid still seemed to seep from her flesh when she was cut. There was a small puppy, found in the ground near a place called Tumat, 18,000 years old, its little muzzle and whiskers and paws perfectly intact. For a while, people wondered if it might be one of the very first dogs. Careful study of its genes gave the honest answer. It was a wolf. There were 2 cave lion cubs, brothers separated by thousands of years in the ground, one of them so flawlessly preserved, right down to the whiskers on his face, that he has been called one of the best-kept Ice Age animals ever found. He is around 28,000 years old, and he looks as though he is only sleeping. And then, at the end of 2024, from the walls of that very gateway to the underworld in Siberia, they lifted out a baby mammoth, more than 50,000 years old. The best-preserved mammoth carcass anyone has ever recovered, a creature that walked the earth before the last ice age reached its peak, lifted out of the thawing ground with its trunk and its face still there to be looked at. I want to hold one honest line here, because this is where imagination loves to run. These animals are not sleeping, and they are not going to wake. They are extraordinarily preserved, but they are dead, and they have been dead for tens of thousands of years. The talk you sometimes hear, of bringing the mammoth back from a body like this, is far more hope than science. Nothing has been brought back. What we have are the dead, kept so perfectly by the cold that they cross the distance of 50,000 years and arrive looking almost fresh. And that, in a way, is the most haunting thing of all. Not a monster, a baby animal, its face intact, that last drew breath before there were cities, before there was writing, before almost anything we would recognize as our world. The ice kept it, whole, the entire time, waiting for the thaw to hand it back to us. So far, everything the ice has given up has been real. Sealed water, killing cold, collapsing ground, ancient disease, the preserved dead. The next entry is different. It is the thing people most want to be under the ice, and it is the one thing that is not there at all. Number 2. The city that isn't there. For as long as there have been maps of Antarctica, there have been stories about what is hidden beneath it, that there are pyramids down there, under the ice, that there is a lost civilization, sealed and forgotten, that someone built something at the bottom of the world, long ago, and that the ice is keeping it from us. You will find these stories everywhere, told with great confidence, often with a blurry photograph of a mountain that happens to have a triangular shape. And I have to be plain with you, because this is exactly the kind of thing this series exists to handle honestly. There are no pyramids under Antarctica. There is no lost city. The famous Antarctic pyramids are simply mountains, natural peaks, worn by frost into the same rough pyramid shape you can see on countless mountains all over the world, including some very famous ones in the Alps. There is no evidence, none at all, of any human structure or any human civilization anywhere under that ice. The radar that has mapped beneath it shows rock and water and more ice. It does not show streets. But here is where it becomes genuinely interesting, because the honest truth is stranger than the myth, and it is the reason the myth has any grip at all. Antarctica really was once a green and living land, not frozen, warm. A few years ago, scientists pulled up a core of mud from the seafloor near the Antarctic coast, and deep inside it they found roots and pollen and the traces of an ancient temperate rainforest, a forest that had grown near the South Pole, in mild, swampy warmth, when the whole region was free of ice. So yes, there were forests at the bottom of the world. That part is true, and it is astonishing, but it was around 90 million years ago, in the age of the dinosaurs, tens of millions of years before the first human being existed. Antarctica has been buried under its ice for something like 34 million years. No person ever walked in those forests. No civilization was ever sealed beneath that ice, because there was no one, anywhere, to build one. That is the honest shape of it. The green past is real. The lost city is not. People took a true and wonderful fact, that Antarctica was once warm and forested, and quietly swapped the forests for pharaohs. And you do not need the pharaohs, because the real thing hidden under this ice is bigger and older and stranger than any imagined city. And that is where we finish. Number 1. The buried world. Everything we have talked about so far has been near the surface. The bleeding crack, the reaching icicle, the collapsing ground, the bodies in the thaw. But the greatest secret of the ice is not near the surface at all. It is at the very bottom, under kilometers of it, and it is enormous. There is an entire hidden world down there, a whole landscape, the size of a continent, that no human eye has ever seen. Buried deep under the ice of East Antarctica, there is a mountain range, not a few peaks. A full range, roughly the size of the European Alps, with sharp ridges and deep valleys, complete and intact, entombed in the ice. We know it is there because we have flown over it and listened to the echoes through the ice with radar, but no one has ever laid eyes on it. Not one of those peaks has ever seen the sun in the time any human could remember. And only very recently have we begun to understand how ancient it is. The rock of that range, it now seems, first rose over 500 million years ago, when the great supercontinents were forming, and it has been preserved all this time, in the end, by the very ice that hides it. And it is not alone down there. Beneath the Antarctic ice, we have found more than 400 lakes. Liquid lakes, kept from freezing by the pressure and the faint heat of the earth, sitting in permanent darkness under the frozen roof. One of them, Lake Vostok, is among the largest lakes on the entire planet, roughly the size of a great inland sea, and it has been sealed beneath about 4 kilometers of ice, cut off from the sky, for something like 15 million years. There are rivers, too, running in the dark between these lakes. And carved into the buried rock, there is a canyon so deep that its floor is the lowest point of land anywhere on Earth, some 3.5 kilometers below the level of the sea. A chasm none of us will ever stand in. Sit with that for a moment. Under our feet, under all that white, there is a landscape as varied and dramatic as anything on the surface of the world. Mountains as grand as the Alps, lakes the size of seas, rivers, and the deepest canyon on the planet. An entire geography, complete, hidden, and dark, that we have only ever touched with echoes. Do you see what has happened by the time we reach the bottom of this list? We started, one entry ago, with people insisting there was a lost world hidden under the ice, a secret civilization, a buried city. And they were right about one thing and wrong about everything else. There is a hidden world under the ice. It is real, and it is vast, and it has been kept in the dark for millions of years. It simply was never ours. No one built it. No one was ever meant to find it. It is a whole buried continent, mountains and lakes and canyons, waiting under the frozen dark, and it does not need a single myth to be the most astonishing thing at the bottom of the world. That, in the end, is what these 7 share. A glacier bleeding out ancient, living water, a finger of ice that freezes the seafloor as it touches it, a gateway in the ground pouring out the deep frozen past, a disease that thawed and killed as if no time had passed, a baby animal, whole, from before our world began, a city that was never there, and, beneath all of it, a buried world the size of a continent that no one has ever seen. I keep coming back to the same thought, standing out here on the ice. We tend to picture the frozen places as blank, and finished, and dead. They are the opposite. The ice is the greatest keeper of secrets on the planet, precisely because nothing here is ever allowed to rot. or fade, or end. It simply waits. And now, as the world warms and the ice begins to loosen its grip, it is starting, quietly, to give those secrets back. Some of them are wonders. Some of them are warnings. Most of them we are only just beginning to read. The ice around me is quiet now, white and endless under a low sun, giving nothing away. I have learned, by now, not to mistake that stillness for emptiness. Here, more than anywhere I have ever been, the surface is only a lid. Everything that matters is underneath it, kept in the cold and the dark, patient beyond our understanding, and in no hurry at all to be found. There is one last thought I will leave you with. From the coldest ground on Earth, my mind keeps turning to its exact opposite, to the great deserts, where instead of ice it is sand that buries and preserves and hides. If the ice could hold a whole world in the dark, imagine what is waiting out there under all that sand in the heat. But that is a journey for another day. If you want to follow the next journey into the places where the Earth keeps its oldest secrets, subscribe to the channel. For now, the ice is quiet, the light is thin and cold, and somewhere beneath my boots, kilometers down in the frozen dark, a mountain range as old as the world stands in perfect silence and has never once been seen. Thank you for coming out onto the ice with me.